Howdy folks, how you doing? My name is Pineapple. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you the graphics downgrade. What has actually happened with the downgrade? We have a new 4K picture comparison set courtesy of Reddit. Thank you, user, it looks like Phoenix. I'm going to be going through this in depth, showing you guys what has changed. Is it a big deal? Basically everything related to it. We're going to dive through in depth here because last time I just showed a few screenshots and people were A, questioning if it happened, B, saying it wasn't what it was, saying it was other features, whatever. We're going to do the whole thing right now. So what actually got turned down or off, depending on the item, was ambient occlusion. So there's obviously a lot of that throughout the game. However, per items in places where there was a lot of items, so places like general stores, maybe like streets, stuff like that, they have turned down a lot of the way that shadows lie. However, it looks like they've also changed some of the ways that lights illuminate the world. So I have this beautiful picture of Arthur, and there's a double of this. I think it's later in the video, but outside, pretty much everything looks the same. If you're outside during daytime, there isn't a big graphical dip, basically. So everybody who loaded up the game and was like, it looks fine, and then hop back off, you're right, it does kind of look the exact same. If you're, like outside of, or in an empty field, if you're not seeing a lot of like items basically, or a lot of animals, stuff like that, it does look pretty much identical to how it did. The only thing that I would say is some of these shadows aren't as harsh, but I don't think the typical player is going to care about fringe shadows on their shirt. Things I would imagine people care about are like the wrinkle shadows in the jacket and the textures of the jacket. All that kind of stuff is the same. We're going to start with the internals of a store here. This is the Saint Denis General Store. If you guys are familiar, it's really close to the butcher. Okay. There's a few shadows that are dark here, but there's not many. So as far as dark shadows go, I would say there's one here. I mean, you could count this and this as two different ones. I guess we will for the sake of the video. I would say this is a darker shadow, although I don't know if that's the texture of the floor changing to fake a shadow drop, or if that is a shadow drop. I can't really tell because, for example, the texture of the floor colors darker here than here. So they might have just done that around where they knew chests were getting placed. They're not chests. Shelves were getting placed. A few things here. Take a note with these posters, how they're just kind of hanging against the wall. Keep that in mind for later. There's no shadows, throughout the entire store, pretty much. There's not any like ambient shadows. None of these things are casting shadows, even though there's clearly some sort of light coming from above. Because that's what all of this light is, this decay light here. Yeah, anyway, we're going to move on to the next version of this picture, where, as you can see, there is just an enormous amount more shadow. Now, to be fair, do we need all of this shadow? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Oh, all right, we gotta pause this video here. So upon the rewatch, I have noticed something that I didn't point out in my initial commentary. This general store actually has an entire light fixture that is no longer turned on in the new update. So on patch 1.0, casting all these shadows, there is a sodium bulb, or a yellow bulb, above the guy, basically above the door that you walk into. There is a light right there. That's what's casting a lot of these shadows that we'll be talking about in the video. And I think just from a basic guess here, that light is a light that is programmed to cast shadows with ambient occlusion. Like, I think that is this light's specific goal. And instead of using that light to illuminate the room, they just upped the exposure a little bit. And I mean, it looks a little more blue, but that just could be because the sodium bulb isn't on and sodium bulbs cast orange light. It's a little 50-50 on whether or not they changed the color temperature of the room, but they definitely just upped the exposure and turned off the light, as opposed to having the light be dynamic in the room. Okay, back to the video. If you're playing on a PlayStation 4 Slim or the Xbox One original, I would highly recommend not complaining, because it was not working great the first launch week regardless on those systems. I say that from experience as somebody who played on a PlayStation 4 Slim. There was not as many glitches. However, as a whole, the FPS was much lower. Now that I have a PlayStation 4 Pro, I can complain a little bit and be like, hey, I know I can run this. Why didn't you give me the option to turn it on? But I mean, in reality, look at that. There's like a whole shadow around the entire, right? This is the only piece of art on the wall that looks like the rest of them did. Look at that. Look at that. So this one looks the exact same, right? And everything else has an intense shadow around it. Even like the Jolly Jacks have shadows. So it's pretty night and day as far as inside grocery stores go. And I think I actually have another example of that coming up soon. However, I really don't think there is any massive difference here. If anything, you know, I don't necessarily want to say that. I was gonna say I think 1.07 looks a little bit better. However, I think tossing back and forth, they both have, you know, there might have just been a little fog out on either day. So I think as a whole outside, they are pretty identical. I guess for the record, this is 1.07, but yeah, they're pretty damn close to me. I've zoomed in on everything from the gun handles to, you know, pedestrians and stuff like that. There's just not a lot of change in stuff like this, even in the shadows here and up here, all that kind of stuff. It all pretty much stays the same. So moving on to what I think is going to be the biggest shocker for people. This is going to be the most blatant use of it, and I think this is why it got turned off. So right now, I'm not sure which store we're in. I would guess it looks like Saint Denis just by the layout here, but this is going to be more examples of the shadowing and where it goes, essentially. So if you'll take note here, all of these pieces of bread have their own individual shadows. Even up here, they've got shadows. Some of these have shadows. The only things that don't really have intense shadows, they just have little ones, are these trays here, right? Pretty much everything has its own dedicated shadow. Now we're going to flip to this, and you'll see pretty much nothing has a shadow. Like, there's pretty much no shadows, as in, like, as a unit. Like, there's no shadows on the shelf. And if you go back, it's just night and day. Like, there's so much going on here. Like, there's so much. It's insane. So, I mean, this one kind of speaks for itself, unfortunately. Like, I really wish there was, you know, I could be like, well, you know, this and that, but if anything, it seems brighter outside, so there should be a harsher shadow. And there's just nothing. So, yeah, it's I don't know. I can see why they did this, right? So this looks like they were like, hey, inside of stores are clunky, whatever. Like, maybe there's an FPS drop there shouldn't be, yada yada yada. Maybe they were getting complaints on their support page, something like that said, hey, this game needs to run better. It looks great, but it needs to run better. And their answer to that was turning off a lot of ambient occlusion for the single player. Now, there's and I will disclose this as a little bit of a tinfoil hat. I really think this is true, for the record. This does not feel tinfoil hatty to me, but just because so many people see these videos now, I do want to disclose this is a tiny bit tinfoil hatty. I think the online couldn't sustain these kind of shadows at all, and so they went from making you accustomed to it in single player to making it not there. And I think they did that because they knew the online couldn't support it, so they knocked down the single player's graphics. Because as much as the game played at a lower FPS when I had my PS4 Slim, I mean, I still have my PS4 Slim for the record, but as much as it played at a lower FPS, I would say it ran fine. Like, I didn't necessarily notice it until I stepped up to the PS4 Pro and put it on boost mode and then was like, oh, wow, okay, this is how the game is supposed to play. But even then, I mean, arguably, I was running it with worse graphics than I was on the PS4 Slim because I bought my Pro after 1.03 came out. So it's kind of hit or miss, but at the end of the day, if you look at, you know, outside, these are the outside pictures. If you look at outside, there's really not a big difference. I mean, you could argue even, I would say 1.07 looks a little bit cleaner in some of these areas, just to be completely honest with you. I don't necessarily know if that is because of 1.07 or 1.0, or if this is just a fluke coincidence, but this, you know, outside, it really seems to be pretty run-of-the-mill, pretty standard. And I think that's what the dev team at Rockstar was thinking, was like, look, here, we're not going to mess with the majority of the game, but when you're surrounded by lots of items, you don't necessarily need the shadows for all of them, right? So this video is meant so far at least to be an in-depth look at what actually got turned off. Is it a problem? Is it not a problem? That is for you to decide. I don't think it's actually that big of a difference. However, I think it was really slimy and shady the way that they went about it. If they would have told us that they were doing this for the online version because the online version couldn't handle it because it's, supported by so many different systems and different systems have different requirements, I feel like that would have been a widely accepted answer. However, they want the online to match the single player, and they can't have their cake and eat it too. So you can't have the amazing graphics and have your online match the single player if your single player looks like this, because this just looks too damn good. So anyway, we're going to be moving on to the last one here and just show you. So this is what I think really was the problem, is when you go into a place like a store, there's just too many items. Like there's all of these have their own little drop shadows, everything. Right? Oh, I didn't mean to click right there. But everything has its own little shadow, right? And if you go to here, they're all gone. So, like, all of these don't have their individual shadows that meet and darken as a group. These don't have shadows. Pretty much anything. And if we toggle back and forth here, you can see they have their own little shadows, and when they overlap, they get darker because math. But when you look at there's just nothing. And here's the thing, is there's really not that big of a difference. Like if you showed somebody who maybe wasn't paying attention for the shadows, these two photos, they probably wouldn't, stake to say, oh, well, the shadows are different. Like I don't think you would get that answer out of somebody. My thought here is that they thought no one was going to notice, and so they just kind of made the call. And then now that people are noticing, it's presenting a problem just because people have noticed that they did it under everyone's nose. So my final thought here is I think if you like online, it is worth it to update to 1.07 because you would be playing online a little bit. It's worth it to have the option to hop online. In my opinion, I think what they're doing there now is a lot better than what they were doing before. However, if you're a mainly single player person and you very seldomly hop in online and you're okay with not hopping online, kind of indefinitely, I would say it might be worth it to roll back just because these, it is pretty, it is pretty jarring if you really pay attention to it. I think it's a matter of personal preference at the end of the day. What the information you guys need to take away with this is the outside, the general day-to-day looks pretty similar to how it did when it launched. It is really where you see the difference inside of stores and places with a lot of items. So if you're looting like a bandit cabin or something like that, if there's like ammo, a bunch of ammo on the table and guns and stuff like that, that kind of stuff will look worse. But as a whole, if you're just out being a cowboy in the merry world, I don't think that, or even cutscenes, I would assume they didn't touch cutscenes. I'm not sure though. I have not personally checked that. So, but yeah, this was an in-depth look at what has changed in the new graphical update for Red Dead Redemption 2. Let me know in the comment section down below how you guys feel about this. Do you feel like it was a really big deal? Will you be going back to 1.0? Will you be staying on 1.7? Or 1.07? Let me know what you're thinking about in the comment section. I know this video is different. I don't typically do PC videos at all, let alone ones that have activate Windows watermarks in the bottom corner, but it needed to happen. We needed to talk about it. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I can't wait to hear from you guys on this one, and I will see you guys very, very soon with a brand new Red Dead Redemption 2 online beta video. Peace.